So GP, welcome back to part 2 of this chat, and this one is probably more to gain your opinion of how the financial advice landscape is evolving, and obviously the role technology is going to play within that. I think probably brought into sharp focus by the announcement of Vanguard providing restricted advice at something like 0.75%. I just wanted to understand what your thoughts were about that and whether you see that as a threat, an opportunity. Is it throwing down the gauntlet to independent financial advisors to change? What's your view?
I think it's been on the cards for many years, and it wouldn't surprise me if the big US firm Betterment also got into the mix. They offer something very similar. I think it was necessary, and I think they've identified a niche in the market that isn't being serviced. With the cost of regulation, the cost of doing advice these days, PI, there's a whole proportion of the industry, of the country that can't afford or doesn't want to take financial advice. And so Vanguard are there to provide some limited advice. But from my perspective, I don't necessarily think that they're going to be a huge threat to me because of the clientele that I tend to deal with. I think that they're going to be very good, especially for young accumulators who have very simple needs and actually can be serviced relatively easily within a more restricted environment. They're not able to deal with high earners, they're not able to deal with people with complex pension planning or lifetime allowance needs, nor couples. It's very much an individual proposition. Whether or not that changes over the years, I don't know, but I welcome it in that I suspect that there'll be an awful lot of people that currently don't pay for, don't feel they can afford to have advice, that there is at least an avenue for them to get some basic advice or some limited advice, because ultimately that should be better than no advice whatsoever.
I completely agree with that. I think, often it's mooted that something like 30 million people in the country need financial advice, but independent financial advisors only service about 3.5 million of those. And that's not a great business model, I would have thought. The opportunity is massive, of course, but firms like this obviously coming in and viewing that market to provide advice is, as you say, welcome. But I think longer terms, I think you've already touched on it there, was that obviously their proposition will evolve. There's no question about that, it has to. As they get their feet under the desk, it's a bit like Amazon, I suppose, starting with books and then all of a sudden it's everywhere and everything. So what do you think financial advice firms need to do to perhaps address or challenge the challenger?
I suspect that the heart of the issue is, are we playing on a level playing field? Are we providing the same service? Because that's where it's going to come down to what's the differentiation. If it's about cutting out all costs and just providing a very streamlined, limited service, there's no point trying to compete with Vanguard. They've got much deeper pockets, they are able to invest in their technology, and it will all be remote, as I understand it. Not everybody wants remote advice. Not everybody feels comfortable about doing everything on the end of the phone or a Zoom call, and some people have quite complicated needs. I suspect where we will be able to demonstrate a difference is the value that the client puts onto the service, being there, understanding them, spending more time focusing on them, their goals, their aspirations, understanding the overall picture and how it pulls together, and then helping them build a plan and then hold them to that plan, knowing that it's going to evolve over time. So I don't think that it's the same. No doubt we will lose clients that are more financially savvy or have more limited needs, but then they may come back at a later point when they need more complicated needs servicing.
And I think that's right, isn't it? It's recognising, the proposition that's being delivered, and your role in that client journey. Because of course, at the end of the day, it's all about building trust, isn't it? And it's all about delivering value. And of course, I think the interesting thing is going to be how this sort of much talked about intergenerational wealth cascading down the generations is going to impact financial advisors, because the traditional way of offering advice might not appeal to the next generation. And I suppose this is where technology can make a difference if you're able to use that technology to support the client in the way they wish to be serviced. Mm-hmm. I mean, what's your view in terms of technology that's currently in situ and where it needs to go in order to support, if you like, that broader reach, that broader challenge?
I think you need to offer the advice process in omni-channel. The past year with the pandemic has made many firms adopt technology that they previously wouldn't have done, including quite a lot of my older clients who would previously not have wanted to do a Zoom, but because they've tried the technology so that they can keep up with family members and grandchildren, stuff like that. Now they're more happy to do it in a work context. But I suppose it comes down to your relationship with your clients and how you talk to them. So if you're not talking to them about their children and their aspirations, or having conversations or offering to have conversations with the next generation at an early stage, so be it helping out with deposits or doing the mortgages for the children, or offering to do that sometimes loss leading business, so that you're starting to build a relationship with the next generation, knowing that actually if you keep these clients for the next 15, 20, 30 years, there's a good chance that some of that wealth is going to be cascaded down. Then you're right. You've got a limited time horizon looking after those assets. Whereas if you take more of a multi-generational approach, so like, okay, inheritance tax planning, well, okay, why don't we try to give the money away whilst you've still got it? Life equity releases is becoming more and more prevalent within my clients, not because they need the money for themselves, but because they'd like to have their children get on the property ladder, or they want to help their grandchildren now when the grandchildren need it, rather than in touchwood 15, 20 years on their death. So I think that's how you can provide that USP that Vanguard wouldn't necessarily be able to offer via a limited advice process, because I suspect they're not going to talk to people about, well, do you have any gifting strategies, or tell me about your wider family and expectations for inheritance, expectations for all that kind of stuff, which we cover as part and parcel. Asking to see a copy of the will, so that then we know who the next generation, who their beneficiaries are. It's getting that data allows you to provide more of a service, which would hopefully mean that you can maintain that asset base if you are charged on that model going forward.
So it's very much education, isn't it? It's getting people engaged in the bigger family piece as opposed to keeping it all very close. And are you finding that your clients are more inclined to speak sort of candidly about their estate planning, their children, grandchildren, and how they can help?
I think it's very interesting, because we then end up having conversations about what is fairness. And so I wouldn't say challenging a client about what they deem to be fair, but actually pointing out sometimes some of their beliefs, which might not necessarily be as accurate as they think they are. So I had a conversation with one client about who wasn't going to give their youngest son as much money towards a house deposit because they'd paid for the university education. And pointing out, well, actually, the older two didn't have to pay for education, but why are you penalising the younger one for simply being born the youngest? And, those kind of mindsets, basically, I think that's where you provide added value, and how we can then have the conversations with the parents about saying, okay, you need to consider giving money to the children now, if they're in a position to do so. And then you end up having conversations with the children as well, because they have financial planning needs. Their parents hopefully are putting a good word in for us. And so I think that's why we can provide something different. But no doubt Vanguard could do that over the longer term, but they're not there yet.
No, that's fair enough. And of course, having a proper client relationship management technology that allows you to capture all of that information and basically share it with the rest of the team is going to be crucial. So given that you said in the last interview you're a bit of a tech geek, candidly, obviously the industry is, the vast majority of financial advisors use technologies from two main providers, Iris and Intelliflo. In your opinion, do you see these firms pushing forward to change their solutions to make them more relevant to the needs of financial advisors? What's your take in terms of the current technology landscape, and how do you think it needs to change in order for firms like yours and other firms to, as you say, develop that sort of more holistic, more connected, more integrated ecosystem?
I think that, so I'm not as au fait with Iris and Intelligent Office as I used to be, simply because I've not felt the need to go looking, you'll be glad to know. But I don't necessarily think that they are going to be driving the industry. I think what's going to be driving the industry is the smaller startups who have got new ideas on more modern platforms. So Abram Akusanya at Timeline and Betafolio, some of the stuff that he's doing with technology is really interesting, and it's about providing a different way of showing things to clients, about engaging the advice proposition, about keeping a track of a client's plan versus their investment. So are you ahead, are you behind? I think that kind of tracking technology is going to be really useful. And I don't think being wedded to only one provider is going to be the way forward, because I don't know who the next great startup's going to be. We just need to see, who's got the right ideas, who's working in the right direction. Whilst I enjoy technology, I couldn't tell you who's going to be the next Amazon, the next Netflix, the next Google. However, there's bound to be somebody within our industry, perhaps not in the UK, but perhaps in America, that develops a bit of software that's going to be a game changer. Things like the banking feeds and being able to collect data. I think somebody that's able to do proper aggregation and pull it all together and let us export that data in a way that we can manipulate and use to feed into our cash flow modelling or what have you. I think that's going to be really interesting, but I suspect that because they're a data aggregator, you would hope that they'd be able to build in APIs into whatever software. But it's about working with providers that recognise that you can't hold all the pie. I think this is where some of the insurance providers are going to fall far behind, where they're trying to be gatekeepers on the data. It's our data, no, you can't have it. Yeah. And I think that's a really narrow, short-term mindset. So that's where I think that the industry is going, is that there will be niche bits of technology that were bolt on to core parts, but you'll go for best of breed rather than saying that a provider can provide everything brilliantly, because I know that Iris's X plan was woeful from the moment that they developed it, because it was behind the times from the moment that it started. So,
and I think you're right. I think it's that ability to play nicely together. Certainly our time at Key Software, where we try to be all things to all men, showed us that as soon as you develop something and you have one user, you've got a support overhead, regardless of how successful that product is. And actually, it's far better to be very clear on your focus. And certainly at Time for Advice, it's all about providing the foundation technology that allows us to then aggregate data and then share data with other best of breed, because I think that is the way forward. And interesting, your comments about open finance, open banking, the ability to aggregate data from multiple different data sources for the benefit of clients, giving them a more contemporary view of their information made available via the web or whatever, is absolutely the way forward. It's coming right back to that always on financial planning we touched on earlier.
But then that also comes back to your point about earlier about how do you compete with the likes of Vanguard? Well, you compete by providing them something that they can't get elsewhere. So if you can, we use a portal and we can collate the banking, their documents, their portfolio all into one place. So they've got a central view of everything. Now that's actually quite powerful if the clients are using it, because that's their central resource. And we say to people, well, okay, we used to provide you with a folder so that in the event of your death, you give it to your kids. Now you just tell your kids to get in contact with us, and we can provide them with access to everything that's available through one easy access portal. Why wouldn't you want that?
Well, and you're absolutely right. It's that keeps people bound to you, and also it's that, as I say, right back to that single source of truth. You're there to help resolve what will be big challenges at a time of difficult times, isn't it?
Well, one of the things that we say to our clients on our website is one of the things we're going to do is help simplify your administration. Well, if we can provide you with a central port for all your data and all your information that you've got accessible upon multiple devices, how you want it, when you want it, so that if you in a prang in your car, oh hang on, let me just pull up my car insurance document because I've got it on my phone as long as I've got Wi-Fi. Oh, sorry, internet access. So it's that kind of stuff where we're trying to provide those little bits of extra value, which the clients aren't necessarily going to think about until they start to use it. But then if they're comparing you against another service, and that other service isn't able to provide all the bells and whistles, but they're cheaper, it's whether or not they value the bells and whistles. And if they don't, well then...
I think it's, as you said, it's not about cost, it's about value. And I think those people that understand that recognise the convenience of having a professional advisor looking after their entire financial wealth, their entire wealth is critical. Thank you, GP, once again, that was fascinating. I really appreciate your insights and you spending the time just chatting to us. So appreciate it, and nice to see you again. Thank you very much.